5 quarterbacks you should start here in Week 12. The first guy's Tom Brady, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I know Brady on that Monday night game versus the Rams, he didn't look good and he looked horrible. But like I said, every time Brady has a bad game, he comes back with a vengeance. We saw that in Week 9 where he had 209 yards and 3 intos. And then in Week 10, he came back with a 37-point fantasy day with 341 yards and 3 touchdowns and a rushing touchdown as well. So Tom Brady's got Kansas City this week here in Week 12. Kansas City, we know they're a high-powered offense. We know they go up and down the field. But I think this Tampa team and Brady, they're going to do the same thing. We saw Derek Carr last week have a huge ball game versus Kansas City. I know the game's in Kansas City. The weather, it might be bad, wet, rainy. But Tom Brady, in these big type of ball games, he always comes through. Monday night was just another hiccup. For whatever reason, on these primetime games, Brady struggled this season. But I think this week is another good week for him. And I won't be surprised if he gets anywhere from 30 to 40 fantasy points. You know they're going to have to throw the ball. Fournette and Ronald Jones, they're 2 guys I can't trust or start anymore on my teams or rosters. So right here, I think it's all on Brady again. He's going to throw the rock 40 or 45 times to keep up with Mahomes and that high-powered Chief offense, and I see a big game out of him. The second guy's Matt Ryan, the Atlanta Falcons. Another guy who struggled big time in Week 11 was Ryan, and it was just a game script or whatever the problem was. Then Julio went down versus New Orleans. He finished with 232 and 2 interceptions, but this week Ryan's back at home, where he's a better quarterback at home numbers-wise over his total career, and he's got the Vegas Raiders coming in. The Raiders, it was a heartbreaking loss for him on Sunday Night Football versus Kansas City, and I think here, Matt Ryan, he's going to have a big game, and he's going to throw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in this one. Julio or not, Calvin Ridley, he returned for Ryan, which is good. He looked healthy. And Ryan, he's just got to get guys involved more. Hayden Hurst, he didn't have a catch or anything in that game. I think he bounces back a little. So Matt Ryan, I think he'll be fine. It's a good matchup. He's back home, and start him this week. The third guy's Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills. After a few bad weeks in a row, the last 2 weeks, in Weeks 9 and 10, Allen had huge fantasy games. Then he went on bye in Week 11, and now here in Week 12, he's back home in Buffalo. They got an amazing matchup versus the Chargers, where quarterbacks go off, and they give up the 6th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. And we saw, like I said, Allen come back to monster form in Week 9, 415 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a rushing touchdown. And then versus Arizona in Week 10, 284, 2 passing touchdowns, 2 windows though. He gave you 38 yards on the ground and also caught a ball for a 12-yard touchdown. And this week versus the Chargers, I could see Allen go for a huge ball game with 300 total yards. And this, I think he's back to form now after struggling from Weeks 5 to 8. But he's back in gear. It's a big game. It's a plus matchup. And I think Allen has a big one, so start him. The next guy is Derek Carr. Carr, like I said, had a big game versus the Kansas City Chiefs. And this week he's got a dream matchup. Is Carr versus the Atlanta Falcons, who give up the most fantasy points to quarterbacks. And Carr 27 points last week versus Kansas City. And once again here in Week 12 versus Atlanta, I could see a similar stat line in fantasy output from Carr. Anywhere from 270 to 300 yards and 2 or 3 touchdowns. This Falcon team, they can't stop no one. This is why they give up the most fantasy points. And if you need a quarterback, if you're in a 2 quarterback or on a bye or whatever, you go out there and start Carr right now. So Derek Carr, he's an easy start this week at the quarterback. And the 5th and final guy is Tua Tagovailoa. I know he got pulled versus Denver, but this week another guy with an amazing matchup. He versus the New York Jets, who give up the 4th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Tagovailoa, I know his passing yards haven't been high, but I think in this game he's going to have a big game and a bounce back after that embarrassing performance versus Denver in Week 11 with only 83 passing yards and a touchdown. This week he'll be much easier. He'll be in New York, I understand, but Denver, just the climate and the altitude's worse out there. And that defense is still pretty vicious, especially at home. And for the Jets, I don't care where the game is. The Jets, they just don't stop anyone. So I think Tua has a bounce-back game and expect anywhere 20 to 25 fantasy points. So that's 5 quarterbacks I'm looking to start heading into week 12.